how do you find the person that you're supposed to marry? Now, obviously, this question is really relevant to some of us. Some of us are in our 20s or 30s and we're single and we're looking for the one and we're trying to, and this search is kind of difficult for us. But I want to make the case that even if you're not in that group, this sermon is relevant to you. Some of us are not planning to look for the one in the future. If you're already married, that should be you. Or if you've decided that singleness will be your path, that's awesome too. Like Paul was single, Jesus was single, and that can be amazing as well. But even as single people, we ought to know how to find the one because we have friends. And if we know how to find the one, then we can help our friends in really big ways. One way we can help is just objectivity. And just taking the ability to take a step back and say, wait, I'm seeing things here that you're not because you're just so blindly in love. And you don't have to say it exactly in those ways. But there is a kind of objectivity that we have as friends, even if we're not planning to find the one for ourselves. Similarly, we have connections where we can connect two people who otherwise would not meet together. And both of these ways, objectivity and connections, these can be life-changing. And so for those of you not planning to find the one, this message will help you to be a better friend. The other group of people here is made of people who are too young to start looking for the one. Maybe you're a teenager, or maybe you're a very young adult, and you're just not ready yet, and you know it. And actually, if that's you, this is actually the best time to learn how to find the one, because as it turns out, there's a lot of prep work and a lot of character building that needs to happen before you start your search, ideally. And if you can do your preparation and your character formation now, then my goodness, you can avoid a lot of heartbreak, and you can set yourself up for a great marriage in the future. So, if you're among the teens and very young adults, this is ideal for you. So now I hope I've made my case now that this topic of finding the one is important for you and relevant to all of us, because now I will tell you the answer. How do you find the one? And then after I tell you the answer, I'll show you the answer from the Bible and through a thinking exercise, and I'll tell you how it worked in my life. So that's the plan for the sermon, and now is the answer. In the search for the one, the only thing that matters is faith. More specifically, in the search for the one, the only thing that matters is faith that expresses itself in character and mission. Even more specifically, in the search for the one, the only thing that matters is your faith and the other person's faith, your character and mission and the other person's character and mission. And now that I've told you, I will show you from the Bible, from the rest of the sermon. Our Bible story today is from the book of Ruth, chapter 2. It's a story about a guy named Boaz and a girl named Ruth, and by the end of the book they're married. But our story today is about their first interaction. This is our first glimpse of the two, and the way that they mesh together and their whatever chemistry that they have or don't have. This is where we start cheering for them because we see something about them. We see their character. So I just want you to pay attention to Boaz and Ruth as I read our Bible passage to you, starting at verse 2 of chapter 2. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out and entered a field and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turns out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Just then, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you." "The Lord bless you," they answered. Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, "Who does that young woman belong to?" The overseer replied, "She is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi." She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters." She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the women. I've told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked him, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. May I continue to find favor in your eyes, Lord," she said. "You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I don't have the standing of one of your servants." At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come over here. Have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar." When she sat down with the harvesters, he offers her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men, "Let her gather among the sheaves, and don't reprimand her. Even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up. And don't rebuke her." I want to take us through a thinking exercise that'll help us to understand the story I read a little bit better. And this will be a longer thinking exercise, but it will tie back into the passage. Just want to talk to the guys here. Guys, suppose you know 100 girls who are single. You're probably not close to 100 girls. That'd be kind of crazy. But for our purposes today, all you have to know is a little bit about them. You have to know enough to make some read on how attractive they are, and some read on their faith, their relationship with God, their sense of character and mission. So, attractiveness and faith, right? And I actually think it's possible for any guy to do this for 100 girls, because any guy can actually go on eHarmony and make an account, and you can actually spend a whole day reading profiles of girls, and that will give you enough information for our purposes today to make us some read on attractiveness and some read on faith. And girls, same thing for you. You can do the same for guys, and if you don't know a lot of guys, I recommend eHarmony. It's good. But I just want to talk to the guys first, because as a guy, nothing stops you from knowing that much about 100 girls. So say you've made your read. Well then, nothing stops you from writing down their names on sticky notes if you wanted. And you could write 100 sticky notes with 100 names on them, and you could arrange those 100 sticky notes into a 10 by 10 grid. And if you did, it would look like this. So, look like this. And girls, you can do the same thing. And actually, guys are looking for girls. So, and girls are looking for guys, right? So, girls, you can do the same thing. Here are 100 sticky notes and 100 names. And you can start sorting these names. You can start arranging these names in a very specific way. You can say that all the most attractive people will go on top, and all the least attractive people will go on the bottom. So you're going to sort these from most attractive to least attractive, right? And so you'll have this top row, which is like super attractive, and this bottom row that you want to stay away from, right? Right. Well, the next thing that you want to do, and we're building a tool here, and it's a really good tool in my opinion. We're building a tool. So the next thing you do is that you take each row and you sort each row separately according to their faith, their relationship with God, their sense of character and mission that you see in them. And so the people with the strongest faith go on the right side, and people with the weakest faith go on the left side. So you do this with all the really attractive people. You know, among the attractive people, some of them have strong faith, some of them have weak faith, right? And you can do this for every single line. And when you finish this, you have a grid in which certain kinds of people appear in certain kinds of the grid. Bottom left corner, we have the Satan worshiper who's also a telemarketer, and they happen to be really ugly, right? Not interested. Top left corner, we have this girl, Regina, from Mean Girls. I'm not sure if you've watched it before. I read up a little bit on her, never watched it. But anyway, I hear that she was the lead cheerleader for her school, and she's beautiful and smart and popular. She's just really manipulative and evil. So she belongs top left corner. Some guys would go for that. But most Christians are looking more towards the top right corner over here. Over in the top right corner, we have someone who's super attractive as well as super Christian kind of thing. Like they really have a strong faith and sense of mission and character. Back in my old church, there was a girl like that. I'll call her Jessie. And she was a pastor's daughter, solid character, served in the worship team, as a teacher by trade, and she was the prettiest girl in the whole church. And new guys would always be coming into the church, and they'd notice her, and they'd always be asking about Jessie. And eventually Jessie chose a guy. And by the way, it makes sense why they're going after her, because, well, why not? Like, she's a 10 for, like, attractiveness and a 10 for faith, like a double 10. Right? And it makes sense, the guy that she chose. Eventually, she chose a guy over here. She chose a guy, I'll call him Bob, and Bob was tall, dark, and handsome, and he was a fellowship counselor and a leading man at church and a teacher by trade, and he was just like the whole package. And it makes sense. And it's actually not a coincidence that this person here, the 10, the double 10, ended up with the double 10 over here, because double 10s, they know they're attractive. They know that they have all the choice in the world, and that's why they pick other double 10s. Which means that if you yourself are not a double 10, or something close to a double 10, then your chances of ending up with a double 10 are close to zero, because you're just being outcompeted. And most guys, we get this. Most guys, we get this. And that's why we're not looking for a supermodel who's also a super Christian. Those people, I think they exist. But your chances of landing one are basically zero. And so most guys will say, okay, let's just be a little bit more realistic. Let's aim for somebody who's attractive, like top 30% would be great, somewhere here. Top 30%, that's pretty realistic. And, if you're a church guy, you want somebody who's a serious Christian too. So, top 30% for faith would be good too. But then we run into a math problem, a numbers problem. Because how many girls are in the top 30% for attractiveness and the top 30% for faith? It's 9%, exactly 9%. And 91% of people are outside of there. So everybody is looking for this 9% of people. These people are really attractive, and these people know that they're attractive too. And so these 9 people in this corner here are looking at those 9 people in this corner over here. Which means if you're outside of that corner, you've got a really difficult time. I have a friend, he was part of the 91% that's outside of that corner. I'd place him probably over here. He's like, great Christian, just girls didn't find him super attractive. And he was telling me how frustrated he was in his search. He says all these girls that he's interested in, they won't even give him a chance. In terms of this grid, we can put it this way, that he is around here. He's around here, right? He's around here. And he's looking into this corner, trying to break into this corner, and he can't. And most people can't. There's only 9% of the population that's like that, and almost everybody wants that 9% of the population. And so he said to me, I wonder if it would be good if I dropped the requirement that she be Christian. Maybe she can just be spiritual. Because I know that he has an eHarmony account, or he had, and he could see so many girls that would give him a chance if he could just drop the requirement that they be Christian. Or to put it in terms of this grid, okay, he can't find somebody here. And so maybe he can find somebody here. Super attractive still, but not there with their faith. And this is actually a very common choice among Christians. I am routinely very impressed by the people that Christians date who are not Christians. They are very, very attractive people. But this is a struggle that you will have to deal with, or somebody else that you know will have to deal with. What do you do if you cannot find somebody in this top corner over here? We find a different way of thinking in the book of Ruth. What I want to do now is I want to place our Bible characters in our story into this grid. First, I want to talk about Boaz. Boaz is the owner of a big farm operation. He has a lot of servants working under him. He's rich, but he's not that kind of rich. He's not one of those stuck-up rich guys. Goes to the field, he says to his servants, "The Lord bless you." And they respond to him, the Lord be with you. And they respond to him, "The Lord bless you." And we get this impression, and we're supposed to get this impression, that he's a godly man, and that he's a blessing to the people around him, and people love him, so he's kind. And as we read on in the chapter, we find his kindness and we find his generosity. And he's so kind towards Ruth that she's just completely blown away, and she asks him, "Why are you so good to me?" And Boaz actually reveals his heart starting at verse 11. He said, "I have been told about all about what you've done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and your mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Verse 12 is a wish. So this second part of the passage that I just read for you, it's a wish. It's almost a prayer. May the Lord repay you. May the Lord reward you. Boaz doesn't just sit back and wait for God to do something, but no, he's actively helping Ruth the entire time, because he knows that God loves it when people help people like Ruth. So Boaz is not just praying, but he's living out his prayer. And as he lives out his prayer, he is one with the will of God. I think we know now enough to put Boaz on our grid. Boaz is a 10 for faith. He is awesome. And he is also a rich man in a country that is just recovering from famine. He has a good name, a great career. I think he's towards the top over here. Maybe he's even a double 10 himself. That's Boaz. What about Ruth? Well, let's talk about Ruth's character. If you were here last week, you'll remember that Ruth left her homeland and her place of safety because she loved the Lord and she loved her mother-in-law who was helpless. So we've learned that Ruth is loyal and earnest and courageous and passionate. She loves God. Our chapter talks about her as one who works really hard. Even though she's been through a lot, she shows no signs of being bitter, but she's just overflowing with gratefulness. That's impressive. When we put all these character traits together, we find that Ruth is just outstanding for character, and everyone knows it actually. So she's a 10 for sure. Amazing character. What about attractiveness? Well, Ruth doesn't have the best career. In fact, she's a beggar. And she's a foreigner from Moab, and Israelites hate Moabites. And this person who introduced her to Boaz, he's like the Moabite who came from Moab. It's like the North Korean who came from North Korea. It's just like he can't get over this, And because Israelites thought about Moabites like that, it's a big deal. And there's one other thing that made Ruth particularly questionable as a choice, which is that she had been married before for 10 years, and she had no children in those 10 years, which means, as far as anyone knew, she was not able to have children, which back in that culture was a really big deal. Like, men married women for their ability to bear children. And so in that culture, at least, when we place Ruth on this grid now, I think we know enough. She's a 10 for faith, but she's pretty much a 1 for attractiveness. Interesting thought. There's no competition for this corner. If anybody's interested in this corner, you can. As we read on in the story, we find that Ruth and Boaz choose each other. And they choose each other not because they fall in love and they lose their minds, but because of a clear, rational choice. And God blesses their marriage beyond their wildest dreams. And the book hints for us that it's a good idea for us to follow in their footsteps, to repeat that same story in our lives too. See, in the whole book of Ruth, there are actually no commands that say you must do this or you must do that. There's no threat from God to punish us if we don't do things this way. But the whole story was written to win us over in our hearts. It was written to hint to you, don't you want to be Ruth and Boaz? Don't you want this to be your love story? And we need the story of Ruth because we actually need to correct another story that's already in our heads. See, all of us have watched love stories unfold on film, either on TV or in movies. We've watched countless of these love stories. And every one of these stories is a bit different, but I keep seeing the same idea over and over again as I watch these films. The idea that you're supposed to fall in love with somebody who's attractive and you have good chemistry with them, and if you can just fall in love with that person who's attractive and you have great chemistry with them, that person will make you happy. But there's something that all those films that we've seen, all those love stories that we've seen on film, they have in common, which is that the people who made those films, they don't know you, and they don't love you, and they don't care about you. Hollywood does not love you. Disney does not love you. Those films were made by a corporation whose primary goal is to make money, and they will make money by selling you whatever love story you will pay for. But the book of Ruth was written by somebody who knows you and someone who loves you, someone who created you and gave his life for you. And for that reason, we ought to trust Ruth more than all the love stories we've seen on film combined. Ruth teaches us that the person who will make you happiest in the long run is the person who will live out God's mission with you. And that person might be a 10 on the attractiveness scale, or that person might be a 1, and it actually doesn't matter. Or to put this idea in terms of the grid, what matters is not that you aim for the top corner over here. What matters is that you aim for the right edge. Find somebody with whom you can build a marriage around God's mission. This grid is close to my heart because 8 years ago I used a very similar method to determine who I was supposed to pursue for marriage. 8 years ago I sat down at my desk and I wrote down the names of 50 girls that I knew. And they all went to church, but these are 50 girls I could make a read on for their character and their attractiveness. And I looked over my list and I said to myself, okay, I need to narrow down this list. I need someone with whom I can build a marriage around God's mission. I need a girl who thinks it's a good thing that I belong to God 24/7. Who thinks it's good if my entire day is spent doing what God wants me to do and being what God wants me to be. I need someone who's not just Christian, but thoroughly Christian. Someone who loves God in their free time, in their finances, in their thoughts, in their emotions. I want, this person doesn't have to be perfect, but I want them to be becoming thoroughly Christian, and no part of their life is hidden away from God. And so I asked myself, who on this list can I trust to be thoroughly Christian like that? And of that list of 50 girls, all of which went to church, I crossed off 46 of those girls, and I was left with 4. And all those 4 girls would belong on the very right side of our grid, over here. I knew 2 of those girls particularly well, so I asked out the one who lived in Vancouver, and she said no. I asked out the one who lived in Calgary, and she married me. Is that not the most mechanical story you've ever heard of? Thank you. Thank you. I didn't fall in love before I asked out Pauline. But I fell in love right afterwards. And now we've been married for 4.5 years, and I'm still in love. I still feel like the honeymoon stage hasn't ended. And we're just really happy with each other. Now, I have to admit, part of the reason why we're happy is because we've been very lucky. We haven't had to go through very serious illness. We haven't had a lot of tragedy happen to us. We haven't been financially stressed. So part of the reason why we're happy is just dumb luck. But on the other hand, the biggest reason why we're happy with each other is faith. Faith that makes us Christ-like towards each other. Faith that gives us a common purpose and unites us in mission, gives us the deepest basis for friendship. And faith that's leading us into the infinite joy of God. In the beginning of marriage, a lot of things matter for your happiness. But in the long term, faith will matter more and more, until in the end, faith will be the only thing that matters. I conclude with the single idea that I said in the beginning. Then the search for the only thing that matters is faith. Faith expressed in character and mission. So we need to concern ourselves with our own character and mission. We need to find somebody else of compatible character and mission. And we need to end our search there with faith. Let's pray to close. Lord, how easy it is to think that you don't love us and you don't know what you're doing. But your word shows us the way in relationships. So give us the faith to do things your way. Help us in our unbelief for your glory and for our joy. Amen.